Start our recording and we'll get started with our Bible study. So our question that kicks us off today is, have you ever been asked to keep a secret that you were later able to share? And can you share it now? It doesn't have, if you're still a secret, you don't have to share it. But you ever had a secret that you were asked to keep when you were younger, maybe, that you had to keep for a time and then you could share it later?
Well, probably pregnancies when mom and or dad, myself included, were not quite ready to divulge all of that, but later we could.
Sometimes people want to share some news with a small group, but they want to wait just a little bit longer to make sure things are going okay, right? Yeah.
I mean, I know I find that in ministry, there's a lot of secrets that I think I hear. But personally, I would say when it comes to relationships, if there's going to be a divorce or if someone's going to break up, and it's kind of like that waiting, that in between time, like needing to tell someone, but we're not going to tell the community yet. So, yeah, say that.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot with people whom they know they can trust to keep a secret. And I've been the bearer of many secrets, and sometimes I wanted to just say, please don't tell me that. I don't want to know, because I then, I can pray about it, but I can't talk to anybody about it. And you have to know when it can be divulged. And sometimes it gets to be, I don't want to, it's heavy sometimes, because you want to keep in contact, you want to make sure they're okay, but you can't talk about it.
I know as a nurse, sometimes people trust nurses. I don't know why, but you get things sometimes that you just can't talk about,
It's funny, like Marcy said, I think ministers get roped into a lot of secrets, but there's some of that too. I know that, I'm not speaking for Ellen and I, but I know sometimes ministers have things going on in their own families that they just don't share, just because it can be overwhelming, the spotlight that comes on you. But I can think, like I'm looking at Michelle, I can remember when not too long ago, well, I guess it is a long time now, but when her husband Tom and Mike Cooper came to my last church and pretended that they weren't there together, they came at different times. Even though they drove down together, one rocked around the block and the other came and sat down. They sat in different places, and here's two random single men visiting the church at the same day, and people, of course, wanted to say hello and greet them. And I think about 4 years ago, just this week, when I preached at Del Mar, and then I went back to Hawthorne, and we couldn't tell anybody about that for a while. And it was really weird. Everybody, I had minister friends going, aren't you worried people will find out? I said, well, it's just not the time to tell them yet. So I hope not, but can't really worry about that, right? So, and then eventually you share it, and that goes that, so, yeah.
And we are very happy for the choice you made.
Oh. I'm glad you continue to be, Rick. So that's
Well, my secret is out that I still have my Christmas tree up.
yeah. Well,
I can't bear to take it down.
We won't tell anyone, Carol. We won't tell anyone else.
Carol, all you need is some red construction paper. You just keep the tree up. Just change it to a Valentine's tree. Actually, you can work ahead. Just take the direct decorations down, and it's already green. It could be a St. Patrick's tree.
Well, yeah. And then you go for eggs at Easter, and
why not? Holiday tree. Very versatile. So.
Obviously, it's not live.
So, although I did see a live one on the curb yesterday, and I thought, wow, that that lasted a long time. They gave that one a good ride till second week of February. So
There's still one across the street that I don't think the town is going to take because it's still covered in all the lights.
oh
The
geez.
town won't take it with the lights on it.
Usually people don't, I mean, that's just lazy on decorating. You just toss the lights with it too. Geez.
Yeah, really.
Well, we're gonna go from secrets. We'll understand why that's a question we ask as we get into our passage. So we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 9, but before we do that, for some context, we're going to back up to Mark chapter 8, and we'll start with verses 27 through 33. So would somebody be willing to volunteer to read Mark chapter 8, verse 27 through 33?
Sure.
Thank you, Rick.
Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" And Peter answered, "You are the Christ." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But then Jesus turned and looked at his disciples. He rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men."
Thank you, Rick. So Jesus is asked who his disciples say he is, or who people say he is. And among the responses he received were John the Baptist, Elijah, or one of the prophets. So how do these answers connect with who Jesus is, even if they miss the full mark?
They all have some connection, connecting Jesus to God in a very close relationship.
So John the Baptist, Elijah, the prophets, they all were definitely connected to God. They had a holy connection of some sort, right? So that's good. Does anybody know the particular prophecy about Elijah? I think it's in Micah, might be in Malachi. It's one of those prophets.
Regarding his not necessarily being killed, but kind of going up into the heavens.
Well, yeah, so we know that in the Bible it says that Elijah was not, he did not die, he was just carried away into the heavens. But it's also that the Jews expected there was prophecy, but also some just expectation that before the Messiah came, Elijah would return.
Oh.
And that's why we have this connection with John the Baptist. John the Baptist is kind of the Elijah when people talk about him, saying, yeah, he was the one heralding the Christ coming. So when they say Elijah has an important role because he's supposed to come back before the Messiah comes. So that's getting really close when people identify Jesus as Elijah, a really important prophet who's returned to herald the coming. So that's really close. I'll have to get that exact reference. I want to say it's in Malachi, but I have to get that exact reference that says that. Now, in verses 29 through 33, how does Peter respond to Jesus with understanding? And what does he do to show he still doesn't understand?
I mean, Peter says that he is the Messiah. He proclaims, "You are the Christ, the anointed one." And so in a lot of, I mean, that is what makes Peter the foundation of the church, and that he makes this proclamation about Jesus. So he understands a big part of who Jesus is. Yeah.
So he makes that confession that Jesus is the Messiah. So it seems like he understands Jesus quite a bit more. The passage I was referencing was Malachi 4, verses 5 and 6. Malachi prophesy Elijah's return. So yeah, Peter says Jesus is the Christ. But then what does he do that he doesn't seem to understand what that means?
He doesn't accept that Jesus is going to be killed.
So Jesus tells him what he's going to do, and Peter says, no, you're not. He begins to rebuke him. I mean, that's not just Peter asking questions. He's telling Jesus, you're wrong. And then Jesus has a very gentle way of telling Peter that Peter doesn't fully understand, right? Get behind me, Satan. Which that's pretty blunt. We understand Satan, the etymology of that word being like tempter. So Jesus is basically telling Peter, stop tempting me. Don't you dare go there. But in no uncertain terms, Peter's pretty direct Jesus is pretty direct to Peter, telling him that he's wrong. So as strong as a rebuke as Peter may have offered, I think Jesus wins the day. So we have some understanding of who Jesus is among his disciples and maybe among the people. There's like a hint, but there's still not a full understanding. And this is going to play a part in the whole secret thing in a little while, because we've already heard that Jesus tells people, his disciples, don't tell anybody I'm the Messiah. And we'll get back to that in a second. So we move on to our passage from Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 8. So would somebody be willing to read Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 8, please?
I can read it.
Thank you, Ellen.
6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus.
Thank you. Who went with Jesus in verse 2? Why them? And do you think anyone else was jealous?
Well, probably the answer to the last question, yes, I would think some of the other disciples might have been a bit jealous. Maybe those 3, Peter, James, and John, who he had just been with 6 days earlier. And perhaps Peter needed a little reassurance as this is what's going to happen, Peter.
You know, they're traveling, so maybe the others are doing some other thing. I always feel bad for Andrew. You know, here's Andrew, like he seems like the one in John's gospel, at least he's the one who gets Peter to follow Jesus. He's like the first disciple mentioned when it comes to following him, along with Simon Peter, his brother. And then we don't hear anything more about him. And so, you know, all the gospels, it's Andrew and Peter and James and John. They're the first disciples called by Jesus. And then after that, it's Peter, James, and John. It's kind of, well, what happened to Andrew? Like this guy, he seems like he was right there from the beginning and we don't hear anything more about him. So,
Yeah, but part of that, Chris, might be that this is being written, about 60 years after Jesus died?
We're not sure. Probably Mark is probably around 30 years after Jesus died, somewhere in that range.
But some of the people may be closer to knowing the stories about the others. And maybe Andrew was busy still fishing and doing things that drew him away from being as active as some of the others. I'm just making excuses for him. This is what a mother does.
Well, the conspiracy theorists could tell you that Andrew was actually the number one disciple, but somebody was jealous and they wrote him out of the story after he started, so.
That too.
But who knows? I'm not suggesting that in any way, shape, or form, by the way. I'm just, I just noticed Andrew's got a lack of kind of, his absence is notable to me. But yeah, so here's some of the first disciples Jesus called. It seems like, I would imagine not all 12 disciples were always traveling with Jesus everywhere he went, but it seems like these three were pretty much by Jesus' side almost always. So there could be a reason, as was stated, that maybe he's going to try and offer Peter a little bit better understanding, maybe knowing that Peter, James, and John were going to be really significant leaders. Jesus wanted to give them the most experiences that he could. Knowing that they were kind of chosen to take over after he left. He wanted to kind of prepare them. We don't quite know. So put yourself there. Explain what happens in verses 2 through 4 and what you think it means.
Possibly he was shy and didn't really want to be part of the event.
Oh, Andrew, yeah, could be.
Well,
So
from a previous study, you had mentioned that Moses kind of represents the law,
yeah.
and Elijah kind of represents all the prophets, which are the two pillars of.
So the people who appear are very significant. Absolutely, Rick. But what does the Bible seem to be describing? What, in your imagination, what's it saying happened?
Jesus got some really good detergent.
OxyClean all over the place.
OxyClean everywhere. And probably, I mean, I'm imagining at that time, I would be so surprised someone would be that clean after going up a mountain. And I think I would just be like, what, like, how is this happening? Like, how is it that you're so dazzling white? Like, that is, I love that it just says dazzling, because it's like the gospel has some like flair. It's like kind of fun, but I think, yeah, I mean, like, I would just be like really confused if I were seeing this.
I would be scared. Because I don't see it that his outfits are like bleached. I see that he really is like shining, like shining, and which is not really normal.
Yeah,
So
is it
for
an
us-
angel? Is it a ghost? Is it a
Right.
combination of those things? Is it real? It just would have been a little hard to place it because you don't have a frame of reference for that kind of dazzle mostly.
So for us, we're picturing maybe Jesus's clothing turning to like LEDs and disco ball, right? But going back to what Marcy said, just think about this day and age where you walked everywhere you went. Maybe you rode a donkey cart, right? It was always either dusty or dirty. You just climbed up a mountain. All of your clothes, if you're Jesus and his disciples, you're laborers. All of your clothes are common clothes. Jesus is a carpenter. He's wiping his hands on his robe all the time, get the sawdust off. They don't have gloves, right? Peter and James and John, they're used to being fishermen. Imagine all the stuff that gets on your tunic and your robe, all the stuff that you just wipe off. For us, it has to be like a light show. For them, just a pure white cloth would have been shocking. Like, just imagine in those days, I was thinking the other day of all the noise we're used to, right? And we hear cars all the time, we hear fire trucks, we hear just the comings and goings of people. And this is just in Delmar, right? If you lived in ancient Jerusalem, things would have gotten quiet quickly after the day settled down. If you're on a mountaintop, you wouldn't hear there's no like planes flying high overhead or anything like that. So the sights and sounds in ancient Israel would have been magnified because they would have been shocking to you. So it could have been that Jesus just showed up in a white robe, but that would have been so amazing. To us, we would have said, hey, he's in a white robe, you know, it must have a stain guard on it or something, you know, like to them, it would have been like, what just happened? How did his robe turn white? Mine has sweat stains. I can't get out of it. You
And
know, it's just,
smell, probably, you
yeah,
know.
like, so for us, it would be a different thing. For them, it could have been that incredible that he just all of a sudden looked clean. And I'm not saying that you know, there wasn't dazzling light. I'm just saying it would have taken, for us, our tolerance for miracles is a lot higher than those in those days. You know, to see somebody transformed, their clothing transformed, it would have been really impressive to see this, even if it wouldn't be impressive by our standards today.
I saw a Netflix documentary on the excavation of a tomb in Egypt. And as you're talking about the dirt and their clothes and everything, if you ever get a chance to see it, it totally documents what you just said about the laborers and how dirty they were and nobody was clean. And I just couldn't believe the dirt and the dust that they worked in all day long. And
it had nothing to do with hygiene. It was just life.
right.
Like that's just, you know, that's just what it was. And yeah, so to see this dazzling white would have just been shocking.
Yeah, and I remember when I traveled in Egypt with you, as well as in India, even the leaves on the trees were dusty, which I thought, how do they survive? Because it just was dusty. And then all the animal smells in Egypt. I mean, it was different to be among camels and burros and pigs and, you know, everything else,
Right.
not pigs, but everything else that was around. It's just a different, it's not seeing it on TV. It's seeing and hearing and smelling it all at the same time.
So something miraculous happens. And then what's Peter's response to it?
Let's stay here forever.
He wants to build monuments.
Yeah, so he wants to build booths, which could be like stalls or shelters or something. But he basically says, oh, this looks like a good idea.
Yeah, it's good.
Let's figure this out. Why do you think that he would want to do that? Why would he want to immediately go to Jesus and say, oh, let's build 3 shelters for you guys?
Because that's what they did. When you landed somewhere, you had to have shelter. And if you're going to house these people and make them stay or build a temple so that they can be honored, you have to figure out a way to do it. And that's what your history has told you to do.
So maybe culturally, he just thought that was a good thing to be hospitable. But why is that?
Oh, I just love Peter because he's so like, this is such a human response of like, when something good is happening, you want to like harness it. You want to be like, all right, I want to like hold on to it and like make sure that I know it's here forever. And like, I want to be there for it. And I think that's like just a human response. It's like, we want to set up a monument and be like, I can return to this every time and kind of control it in a way. I want to control when there's good things happening.
Now, my version, the teenager Bible, said, he said this just to be talking, for he didn't know what else to say.
Mhm.
They were all terribly frightened.
I love the translation, Joyce. Peter's kind of motivated to do something, but he has no idea what to do. So Peter's like, just get busy doing it, and hopefully we'll figure it out along the way. You know, they're all terrified. They have no idea what to do, and Peter's looking around, going, "Well, somebody should do something, right? So let's build some shelters or something. I don't know. Let's not. I mean, maybe this is the time we're supposed to speak up. We don't want to look bad in front of Jesus and Moses and Elijah to boot. Like, what? Guys, we got to do something. We're definitely not supposed to sit here quiet." You know. So what happens next? And why is this important in what's going on?
Kind of a reappearance of God in the cloud and reaffirming that Jesus is my son, my beloved son, just like at his baptism.
Yeah, if we thought it was scary before, let's make it like even more terrifying. It's like I just imagine these big clouds like looming over the mountain, and it's like all of a sudden booming noise. It's just like, oh my gosh.
And then he said to them, Elijah is indeed coming first to restore all things. And you think about what we're going through right now with this pandemic. We would love to have things restored, and everybody wants it to go back, but yet maybe it'll never go back to the way it was for most people. It'll go back to a new normal. And they don't know quite what to expect with it, with these visions and with what they're hearing, but it seems like they're willing to listen and hear it out.
And I've always kind of been curious how they knew that it was Moses and Elijah, because they didn't have photographs and said, oh yeah, they are that, or anything like that.
Embroidered into their robes.
Yes.
Moses had the tablets.
Hello, my name is. Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Rick. So how do they even know? So that's another thing,
They
But
all had beards and bathrobes.
We just talked about the disciples not really understanding who Jesus is. And here's one more big, really, really obvious way of them saying, oh, yeah, Moses and Elijah are very different than Jesus. Because the cloud comes down and doesn't say, you have met Elijah, my prophet, and Moses, the giver of law, and Jesus also. Moses and Elijah are not mentioned at all. It talks, this is my son, my beloved, and then the other two disappear. So it's kind of like a special event for these three disciples at least to understand, oh, all right, so Jesus is even more different than we thought he was. So even these other two,
there's a dynamic that we don't understand. I mean, there's something that even though we may have seen Jesus, there's something that's different here that we aren't getting hold of.
So still maybe grasping something, but still not getting it all, right? So this is another episode to help them understand Jesus is very different than they've understood him to be. Even when they've called him John the Baptist or Elijah or one of the prophets or even the Messiah, they still haven't quite figured out what that all means. And here's another episode, a really, really incredible episode that helps them try and figure out that a little bit more. So now I want to conclude our reading with the next two verses, Mark chapter 9, verse 9 and 10. Somebody be willing to read just those two verses for us. Thank you, Carol.
As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. Is that it?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
So why does Jesus tell them to be quiet about what happened?
Because it was amazing.
Because he's been telling everybody, don't tell anybody what I just did.
Right.
But why? Why not tell people go and share? Sorry, Carol?
He didn't want to be lynched.
You want to be lynched yet?
Or hung on a cross. Well, if we assume he's the Son of God, and we believe that, then he would be all knowing, and he would know that the crowds would get larger, and the people it could become a mob scene that would be uncontrollable, and then the jurisdiction of the local authorities might be stronger to try and suppress him, and he couldn't get finished with what he was trying to accomplish. So
Absolutely. There's danger from the authorities, there's danger of the crowds and all that. Absolutely. But I want us to think in a different perspective of back to the disciples. Why would Jesus not want the disciples to share what was going on just yet, based on what we've just read in Mark chapter 8 and now in chapter 9?
Maybe because it wouldn't clearly make sense until after he had risen.
So think about knowing half the details of a secret and then going and sharing it before you know the whole secret.
Whole story.
What's that, Donna?
The whole story. Yeah.
Right. So what if his disciples go around saying, Elijah has come, we've met him, you should come and follow him too. The Messiah has come. He's going to restore Israel and kick Rome out. You should follow him too. You know, if you only know half the story, the people you're telling it to won't understand who they're coming to follow. If you don't even understand it, then they won't have an idea of it. So even the disciples, they keep trying to figure out who this person is. Jesus says, I'm going to go die on a cross. And Peter says, no, you're not. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Even his number one, his chief follower, doesn't understand it. So they go around sharing this secret that Jesus has come to overthrow the Romans and restore Israel to its rightful place in the world. They're going to be all really disappointed. And when Jesus dies, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
He was a failure. He was a false prophet. He was a false Messiah.
And they hid, actually, after he died.
But at least, go ahead, sorry.
It seems like Mark tells the story pretty straightforward, whereas some of the other Gospels use parables to tell the stories of what he wants them to understand. Here he seems to just want them to hear what he is trying to tell them, which maybe it's a different tack, just.
So in biblical studies, we call this Mark being concerned with the messianic secret. So Jesus tells people, often in the Gospels, don't tell other people what's going on. All the time in Mark, he's healing, don't tell anyone. He's saying this, don't tell anyone. And it's not don't ever tell anyone. It's don't tell anybody until I've come back from the dead. I've been risen from the dead, which they're like, what are you talking about? Risen from the dead? But you can't understand who Jesus is until after that. Right? Because otherwise he's a Messiah who's supposed to overthrow the Romans and doesn't. So if I'm a follower of Jesus who's expecting him to overthrow the Romans and he doesn't, I'm not a follower of Jesus anymore. I put my faith in the wrong guy. But if somebody tells me the story after he's risen from the dead, I say, whoa, that's a Messiah. And so this secret at the end, the transfiguration, we could preach many, many sermons about what happens on that mountain and Peter's response and how it's a human response and how they don't know what to say. So they just start talking, as Joyce's Bible said, which I love that. But the key to it all is really in these last two verses when Jesus says, don't tell anybody, because it doesn't make sense until you know the end of the story. If you only know half the secret, you get it wrong, right?
Thank you. I've pondered that question for years.
Does that make sense though, Rick?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because, it's like having a witness to something, only know half the story. It's why these, novelists and movies are so good, which they give you kind of what you see at the front, but they don't tell you the backstory and, the mysteries in what all happened behind that. And then at the end, it comes together and you go, oh, now I understand, the twist ending, because I didn't know it was so-and-so was driving the story. I thought it was this person up front. No, it was really the person behind the person. So until you know the part about Jesus coming, his kingdom is not of this world, until you know that he's coming for a heavenly kingdom, that he's coming to help you understand God's mercy and grace here, not overthrow of the Romans, you don't understand him at all. And it can lead not only to not understanding who Jesus is, it can lead you not to follow Jesus. Because why wouldn't you be disappointed? If somebody came and told you this is what they came to do, and then they didn't do it, you'd say, well, they're either a liar or they just a failure. Either way, I don't need to follow that person, right?
Well, it's very hard to accept what you don't understand. And there's a lot that would be hard to understand here. And then to just be asked to accept it on your faith and from, Elijah here or whatever, it would be confusing. It would be very confusing.
Especially if you don't have the end of it's probably still confusing when you have the end of the story. But at least if you have the end of the story, then you can look back and go, oh, James, John, you remember that transfiguration?
Yeah.
Remember that? Jesus was trying to tell us something. We didn't quite get it then. Remember when he asked us who we thought he was? He was trying to tell us something. We still didn't get it then. Remember when he told us he had to suffer and die? He was trying to tell us something. We still didn't get it then. But now it starts to make a little bit more sense because we have the complete picture. And had we started to go and tell everybody about who Jesus was when we didn't understand who he was, it would have been really difficult.
Yeah.
And we still do that today, right? We as Christians still do that today. We emphasize certain parts of Jesus and it kind of falls flat. So some of us just talk about Jesus as a social worker. And that's good. People want to follow the social movement, but they never accept Jesus as Lord and Savior. And some of us only talk about Jesus and eternal salvation, and we miss the whole radical realignment of the world that he wanted, of the meek and the poor, and valuing the widows and the orphans. And so all we're doing is heaven focused, and we're not even earth focused. So when we miss some of the story, we miss the idea that we have to be focused above and below. And it's a struggle. It's hard to do that, but we see it in Christianity all the time. We see certain people and certain movements that are really, really concerned with one and not the other. And we understand how they don't really paint the full picture of Jesus. It's not a satisfying Jesus. It ultimately just kind of comes up short.
And many of those people don't want to be questioned. They want to be listened to. That's why they do well speaking to big audiences.
I think all of us don't want to be questioned, to be honest. Some of us are just a little bit more firmly convicted that we're right. But when we understand that maybe we don't have the whole story even now, we tread a little bit more carefully. But we can share the secret now. We just have to be careful in how we do it. So, my final question is, how does the resurrection change the meaning and sharing of this event for the three people? So verse 10 says they talked to each other a lot, but that was it. They didn't share the secret. Jesus told them not to, they didn't. So why would they keep talking to each other about it?
They were trying to process it.
What's going on? And then
it was still, what, 2.5, 3 years maybe before they could tell the story?
probably, yeah, at least a year and a half, 2. Yeah, this is probably sometime early in the ministry of Jesus still, or middle. But yeah, and that's a good point, Rick. So like, there's still a lot of ducks that have to get in the row before they can really understand who he is. It's amazing, these disciples, they're chosen for their ministry and for their leadership perhaps, but they really can't do it until Jesus dies and is returns, is resurrected from the dead, because until then they're just, healing people, which is good. They're doing that, right? They're bringing people to Jesus, but
Sing them from the dead.
they're still not quite understanding who Jesus is. At best they see him as a faithful miracle worker, but then clouds descend and God says, "This is my son," and they think, what does that mean?
And then to think that Mark, who wrote this particular gospel, wasn't even there. So now
Right.
he's hearing it second, third hand all this time later.
So when we think of the Gospels, we think maybe John was a witness, But Matthew, Mark, and Luke they're all getting it secondhand. They're getting it from other sources, from Peter, and maybe from other disciples, But yeah, it's pretty incredible to think about it, but especially this question of the messianic secret. Why does Jesus keep telling them not to say anything? Once we step back, we say, oh, because he just asked them what they knew in Mark 8, and they got it really wrong. So he's like, it's not the time to share yet, guys. Like, we got a little bit more to go. You're not a failure. We need to go through the 100 level class and the 200 level class and 300 level class. You need to study in a master's degree before you really should go out talking, because otherwise you're going to make more of a mess of this than helpful. So there we are. And I end today with just a question for reflection. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it. And I wasn't trying to make a point here, but it's interesting that the transfiguration, so there's something, I think you're all familiar with it, but there's something called a lectionary, which is a cycle of 3 years reading, which a lot of Protestants use, and Catholics have used some sort of a lectionary for centuries, right? And the good thing about it is that you can talk to a friend or a neighbor who might go to a different church, and if they use the lectionary, you were both talking about the same story in church, right? You could talk to a family member across the country. You could talk to your Catholic friend, and they're like, oh yeah, we heard about that story in church too today. The bad thing is sometimes it gets us trapped into talking about the same passages over and over and over, because it doesn't cover all of the Bible. It's a representative part of the Bible. But interestingly, this text comes up twice a year, which Easter only comes up once a year. The nativity story only comes up once a year. All of these other parables in that, they only come up once every 3 years. And yet the transfiguration comes up in the summer and in February every year. So my question is, do you think it's important enough to deserve 2 looks every year?
We need as much of a reminder of what Jesus was, is, and represented now as much as ever.
And so that's not to say that if you go to Del Mar Reformed Church, you'll hear this preached every year, let alone twice a year. It just so happens that it is a suggested reading. Now, Pastor Marcy and I don't always go with the suggested text, and every week there's 4 or 5 suggested texts, so you don't have to choose this one. But it is interesting, because I read this for preparing for this. I thought, man, I don't remember preaching on the Transfiguration a lot, but I feel like I've done it recently. And I look back, and it wasn't Mark, but another passage of the Transfiguration. I'm like, oh, August. Yeah, that was really recent. And then I thought, yeah, but I think I have something different to say about it this time. So we're gonna wrestle with that one again, especially as we get into Lent. So as we start preparing for Easter, what is this? Especially those last 2 verses about Jesus telling us to keep this a secret until after the events of Easter. How does that help us prepare for what's about to come? How does that help us understand the whole story as we live through it again this year? So thanks for joining with me in study today. And again, we'll look forward to an incredible study next week, because Pastor Marcy's leading it. And no pressure though. Yeah, next week we're going to kick off our sermon series that's going to take us through Lent, and that's going to be on questions that are found in the Bible. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that'll be a really interesting series. But thank you all for joining again today. Look forward to joining in discussion again soon. So in the meantime, take care, and may God's peace be with you.
Yes. Stay safe in the snow. Bye-bye.